Welcome back, gamers, to our Dragon Age the Veilguard review podcast. That's not a podcast. Part 2. In the first episode, we covered primarily companions. We touched a bit on factions for the most part, and we basically spoke very little about the game itself. Because we are sad, and that's just how we operate. So, pardon me. In this episode, who knows what we're going to cover, and who knows how long we're going to go? Maybe this will be another doozy of a session. So, I'm going to welcome my co-host, Pearl and Marie Elliott. And Pearl, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Pearl K. Elliott. I'm sick, in many ways. And I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Patrick, for having me on the pod. Yeah. Let's get this shit rolling.
Let's do it. So, we naturally left off on talking about all the companions, all 7 of them, and their arcs, their personalities, what we like, what we didn't like, and all that. Pearl, do you have a thread that you want to pick on and go off of now? Where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to go? What are you feeling? What are you itching to talk about?
Well, okay. I was thinking that the natural spot to expand on in my mind was to talk about just to finish wrapping up the factions attached to the companions, because we talked a lot about them, but there's a little bit more I'd like to say about a few of them. But I wanted to actually let you choose because I chose companions last time.
Yeah. I think. I think. I think we can briefly wrap up factions because we did kind of start factions for the most part when we did our companion discussion. So I have no problem covering factions. I would probably like to do so in brief just because we did touch on a lot of them. And yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Mm-hmm.
If that works for
Yeah,
you.
I think. Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, so let's just briefly touch on the Lords of Fortune. They don't need to be here, right?
Yeah, that's about all we need to touch on them. We love Isabella.
Moving on. The Grey Wardens.
Yep.
So Grey Wardens this is the first time that the Grey Wardens have really been a focal point, really, since Dragon Age Origins. I think they were a plot component of Inquisition with the whole Corypheus using the taint and the blight to simulate the call and basically manipulate the Grey Wardens. But this is like we are with them from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, and they are essential. They are integral. And so, talking about the Grey Wardens, especially as someone who played as a Grey Warden, I thought this game really did right by them in terms of content. I think they gave me plenty of things to munch on, think about, and contemplate throughout the entirety of the story. I think it's interesting that this game, what I would, to broaden it outside of the factions, it's interesting that the game gives you some of its best content somewhat inconsistently. Like, I did not expect that the Davrin, companion questline was going to give me some of my favorite Veilguard content in the whole game. Like, I just thought I'm just going to do his companion quest. It's going to be chill. We're going to get this resolved, save the Griffins, move on. And so, stumbling into it, having this whole Cauldron questline was very cool based on the merits of like the Grey Wardens and the whole factions. So going into just the lore of the Grey Wardens, them harvesting archdemons and keeping their remnants is somewhat based. It makes sense. It is something that I think we contemplate. At least maybe at the time, I did a lot more of like, you killed the archdemon. That whole body's on top of that tower. What do you do with it now? And the idea of like the Grey Wardens take it for their own and they do with it what they will. I think it's compelling. I think it adds some like moral ambiguity to the thing, because it's like, okay, you're responsible for taking apart the archdemons. You're also kind of responsible for disposing it. But since the Grey Wardens are their own kind of governing body, like they're so off in their own world, no one can reinforce like, oh, did you even get rid of the archdemon? And it's like, no, we kept the archdemon and we have its blood and we do all that. And it's like, oh shit, that's I thought was really neat, and I thought that was morally gray. I really appreciated that. The Weishaupt mission, especially just being the home of the Grey Wardens and all that stuff, such a cool mission, just in as a whole, just with the Gillinane cloud, the Blight dragons kind of coming through. We get our first archdemon fight. You have to deal with the first warden. I like the first warden kind of being an asshole. I think him being somewhat like the antithesis of what you think of a Grey Warden is. And when I think of a Grey Warden, I think of Duncan. I think Duncan in all of Dragon Age is probably the best Grey Warden, just bar none. I like the first warden as a foil to that. He is a super buttoned up, by the numbers, and kind of combative to his own counterparts throughout the story. I think that's really interesting, and especially me playing a Grey Warden added a lot of texture with how I thought about dealing with him and dealing with the Grey Wardens. Such to the point where I was like, I'm a Grey Warden. I have a history of leading and making my own decisions. So I'm just gonna defy the first warden. Like, he is impeding on this inevitable threat. So I'm gonna knock him out. So I thought that was really impactful. Weishaupt as a whole, its lore tidbits, its Easter eggs, I loved all of that. I ate all that up. Having the joining chalice from Dragon Age Origins, it's member berries, and I'm looking at the cup and I'm like, oh, such a beautiful time having this chalice. Iconic. Where's the warden? The game won't talk about it. Where's Kieran? Oh, we don't want to talk about that. But I get it. You can't address everything, even though I think the game somewhat has a responsibility to answer some of those things. I think my only gripe with the Grey Wardens as a whole is my interpretation of how their culture should be represented. And by that I mean I think Dragon Age, I think the fan base has obfuscated how the Grey Wardens should be presented, and the writers take the pedestal that the fan base puts it on and kind of deliberately puts them on the pedestal. That meaning, and what I mean by that is, they kind of are treated as traditional knights in shining armor, and like the kind of like these figures from King Arthur, and they're supposed to be these kind of beacons of nobility and doing right. And that's why I appreciate a character like the First Warden, because he is a foil to some of these characteristics. But my interpretation from how I played Dragon Age Origins, and I don't know if you understand this reference, Pearl, but maybe the average listener may understand this, but I interpret the Grey Wardens like the Night's Watch. And the Night's Watch is a faction within the Game of Thrones world where typically if you commit a horrendous, horrible crime in Game of Thrones, you have two options. If you're even allowed the two options. If you're allowed the two options, typically you're either, well, there's technically three options. You're either sentenced to death, or you're sentenced forever in prison, or they send you to be part of the Night's Watch. And the Night's Watch means, hey, we basically put you in a wagon, we ship you hundreds of miles up north, and you go to this big, several 100 feet tall ice wall in Arctic conditions with basically just dudes all around you, and you're sworn to watch everything beyond the wall to make sure that wildlings or the fucking, what are they called? The creepy crawly winter dudes. Anyways, suffice to say, it's a cult of punishment, and that's how I interpret the Grey Wardens. It is a cult of punishment. It is, they basically scrounge up prisoners and recruit prisoners by saying you can seek redemption by joining the Grey Wardens, and if you survive the joining, you can do that. And the joining is supposed to be like almost like a culling process. Like, it's not a test of worthiness, but it is a test of like you may have an opportunity of a sort of freedom, but this freedom is hell on earth. Even if you survive the joining process, you might just die at that point. So you're still being sentenced to death. But if you live the joining, you're still being sentenced to death by way of, at some point you're going to hear the call and you're going to have to listen to it, and you're going to be dying at some point. So it is this cult of this is not great. Like, we all signed up on this journey not to be knights or to be put on a pedestal or anything like that, but to kind of, we're on a death walk, so to speak, where we know that this ends in only one way. And I wish that the culture of the Grey Wardens kind of reflected that more. The danger, the dourness, even though things are good now, we're still going to be dying. And so I think with characters like Evka and Antoine, while great characters, and I really do like them, I think they don't represent the culture of what I think the Grey Wardens should be, which is almost like a accepted humility based off of the nature of their circumstances. And I don't know if it kind of broadens back to what I brought up in the first session of like how this faction should be a little bit, or elements of this game should take themselves a little bit more seriously. I wish the Grey Wardens took themselves a little bit seriously, of like, you have now this new Darkspawn, new version of Darkspawn. You have these blighted gods, blighted dragons, all this type of stuff. And it's like I'm making a big thing out of like what is essentially a nitpick. Like, they're technically knights, but they lean to more King Arthur style knights as opposed to what I had wanted, which is a Night's Watch, which is a glorified suicide pact that happens at some point in their future, and their demeanor, their how they approach things reflects that. This idea of like, I know I'm going to die at literally any point, and I'm willing to put my life on the line at any point. I think Davrin shows a bit of this. He knows what he's signing up for, so I think in terms of what Davrin is, it's pretty solid. But as a whole, as a faction, I think they are a little bit separate from what I had wanted, which is more of an origin style type of faction. Even Alistair makes jokes about so many times about like, oh, we're gonna die and we're doing all this just to, with saving everyone, with the idea of we might not make this and we have to be ready for that sacrifice. And that you can make a little bit of hee hee ha ha, but there's an undertone of like, oh, this fucking sucks, but this is the gig. This is what we do it for. Especially with just the nature of, we have two blights occurring at the same time. So this is a very unstructured thought bubble on how I felt about the Grey Wardens. I like the new lore, the new content. I think they do right by you playing as a Grey Warden with dialogue that's relevant and related. I do enjoy Evka and Antoine and characters like the First Warden as a foil. But the culture is still kind of just a bit off for me for my taste, and it's not even like horribly far off. It's not like they're quirky, kind of sword wielding bro chads or anything like that, but they're just a bit off from what I would have wanted. But that is how I feel about the Grey Warden faction in Veilguard.
I actually had a question about, and I don't know if this is coming from, I had a lot of interaction with Davrin, um, because I romanced him, and so I don't know how many more conversations I had with him, and or like how much more I exhausted his dialogue options, if at all. I kind of feel like you probably had a lot more actually to talk about him with because you were also Grey Warden. But he talks a lot about how, for the Grey Wardens, like there's a lot of redemption and like they take a ton of people from like death row or whatever, and then you're kind of like changed, and like a lot of these people used to be criminals, and like all these things that he says. And like when I think about origins, like, and even actually Dragon Age 2, um actually just in general, when I think about the Grey Wardens, I kind of go back and forth on that because I wasn't for sure like what the established lore was about um all that. Like by that I mean like you're gonna hate that I'm gonna talk about this, but like in Dragon Age Origins, like the idea of making Loghain a warden, right?
Yeah.
Um like in my head when I was like, oh, make him a warden and just immediately send him to the deep roads, when I in game made that choice and didn't quite realize how seriously the game was gonna react to that. Because even though I at that point had like consequences of my actions, like I never played a game that like so seriously um reacted to my bad choice. But like with what Davin was saying there, a lot of times I still got but I think I made the right choice. Thoughts about origins still, because I was like, this is like me understanding that this guy is a strong warrior, like that he doesn't necessarily have um loyalty and all that kind of stuff, but like I like assuming he survives the joining, he would be an asset in this specific fight, and also it might like cause him to rethink what he's done. um I still think it's obviously a slap in Alistair's face for sure, and I think his reaction is totally fair. But like in what Davern was saying, I was a little confused in my head because I was still thinking about like your reaction to that choice I made in Origins.
Oh,
All the
so
way
you're
back to
saying like the principle of your choice is based off of the thing that I'm asking for, looking for, but yet the game, as well as myself, did not share a sentiment that reflected that when you made that choice. And why is that the
yeah,
case? Yeah, I can answer
yes,
that.
kind of,
I can
yeah,
answer that. So the Night Watch, similar to the Grey Wardens, again, is considered like the best possible outcome for those that commit certain deeds and crimes. And that's because the culture of it is like you're doing something that
oh
literally
wait,
no one would want to do.
yeah,
And so because of that, there is a leery like respect for this organization that does something that no one wants to do, and they accept those that you know are basically unbefit for society because of choices that they made. But because their organization is looked at with such a level of kind of, there's respect that's tied to doing the thing that no one really wants to do. It's very I don't know how to describe it, but what I'm trying to get at is that there is a threshold, suffice to say, where you may do something wrong and you are not fit for normal society. And your outcome would be like, okay, well, you can seek redemption through this, joining this cult, the suicide pact of sorts. And but that threshold is pretty somewhat narrow, and you can easily supersede that threshold and be, no, you're not even worthy for this group, and therefore should be put to death. And that happens to be the case in a lot of like medieval kind of structures of like keeping you alive is a reward or like a favorable outcome compared to the rest. So like, yes, Loghain could contribute a lot to the Grey Wardens. The Grey Wardens are not worthy of the smut that kind of Loghain brings with him, with how he disrespected the Wardens, disrespected his country, all that. The crimes that Loghain does is how the game looks at it, and technically how you, the player, should potentially be looking at it is, you're not even worthy for this organization. Whatever you bring to the table, that's fine. We do not need you. We'll figure it out another way, and you should be put to death. And that happens a lot in Game of Thrones as well. You know, not every single outcome of judgment, whether it's the king or local lords or whatever the case may be, not every criminal's judgment is, oh, let's just send you to the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch is not the end-all be-all for all of these criminals. It's more often than not, yeah, we'll just kill him. You know, like, you wronged us, and so we'll just put you to death. Even if the crime isn't as heinous. I mean, depending on how you're even being judged, you could be killed for something that's super harmless. So, like, these groups live in this, like, in-between of you have to be doing something that isn't horrible, or you have to be, like, exiled of some sort, so that you're not being put to death, but you are still being punished in a way of you have a shitty life up ahead. So that's kind of how I perceive the Wardens and the Night's Watch in parallel. Loghain is supposed to be such a despicable character with the way he tries to put a stranglehold on power within Ferelden, that, you know, you're supposed to look at him as like, you betrayed King Caelid, you betrayed Duncan, you let us all down when we did our job, and now you want to be one of us because you're supposedly going to be an asset. No, you're not one of us. You proved that at that night in Ostagar. So go be put to death. And so,
No.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot more sense to me. It is like the words of what Davrin says there, and like some of the other wardens, and like it is a mental disconnect for me a little bit, because and I think in a way that it is not like, it's not a reflection on the game as it is much as it is a reflection on like me, and like how I understand semantics and like circumstance of like group dynamic, like that I have a mental disconnect over that, because I'm like, I don't get it. Didn't he do something wrong? And shouldn't we? I have a lot of, also, like, it's part of the great thing about the Grey Wardens, and just like a type of group like this, is the moral grayness of like taking someone who's committed a crime and being like, hey, here's how you can atone, kill yourself, you know? Like, there's a lot of just, is that okay that you can ask there? But that's why I wanted to get your opinion on that, because I wasn't sure exactly how to understand that in my head. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness on that. And I wanted to actually, this is not a faction in this game, which I was a little sad about, kind of. I'm sad it's just not brought up as much. But like, I'm curious, like, about how the Grey Wardens, like you use the Night Watch as the example, and I was like, wait, isn't there another example from Dragon Age? And I was thinking the Legion of the Dead.
Yeah. Legion of the Dead is very similar to that, except there's not really a joining process. But yeah, being sent to the Deep Roads and don't come back. It's a very, very similar thing. But the Legion of the Dead, it's a little bit it's a little bit more twisted just because it's not, the Legion of the Dead is not like a society or a formal faction. Like, they don't interact with anyone. They stay in the deep roads and they're there until they die.
Yeah.
And they make it as far as they can and they keep going. And in the best case scenario, you get a Sigrun who you meet up in Inquisition, and she's,
Sigrun's an Inquisition.
yeah, I told you to play that DLC. Um,
Fuck.
and you get great lore on the Legion of the Dead, and you get the start of the Titans lore. And yeah, no, it's very similar. It's a very similar principle, but even then, you have to be looked at as even worthy. Your crimes have to be worthy enough of foregoing your name, your identity, the crimes that you've done, and then becoming this thing, this Night Watch and this Grey Warden or this Legion of the Dead, which carry this like humility and nobility of, you're basically just signing up for death by way of this harder lifestyle. And that comes with an actual respect amongst your peers, and sometimes you may not even be worthy of that. And so that's why you'd be put to death.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask because I don't know the Night's Watch. So they're like an actual like you said, they're still part of society though. So they're not like Legion of the Dead, like we said. Like, who are
technically they're a part of society, but the Night's Watch, they stay at the wall, and no one wants to go to the wall because there's nothing at the wall, and you're not. The Night's Watch is responsible for going past the wall, and no one in society really wants to go past the wall. So,
oh. Sorry.
Yeah, so think of like Winterfell, which is a huge, big. It's like the capital of the North essentially, and if you have to go like several hundred miles past Winterfell to even get to the wall, and at which point there's really no one up there except the Night's Watch, and the Night's Watch is not allowed to leave the wall. They're supposed to stay up there, and they're supposed to get what they need by their own means and survive and protect the wall by any means possible. So they're technically part of society, but they're on like the edge of the known world, as Game of Thrones lore has it.
That makes sense.
So yeah.
So kind of like the Anderfells in a little bit of a way, but not exactly. That led me to another Grey Warden question I had actually about the game, which fuck, we could maybe do a whole fucking 3 hours on just the Grey Wardens if we truly wanted to, but we're not gonna do that. But potentially we could. But I wanted to ask about the Grey Warden ruins actually in Ravane Coast. I don't know how much you like looked through all of it. I'm sure you did a decent amount of it, but I thought that was really interesting, like just kind of the history of that place, like just as a weird, not super integral like part of the plot, but like something you could get kind of background into, and like learning about the first Qunari Warden. I was curious if you had many thoughts about that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good lore, and was an interesting puzzle quest. I thought it was a little bit of telling, not necessarily showing. So as a quest, I didn't super love it with getting these puzzles that lead you to these codices and missives and stuff like that on the first Qunari Warden. But I thought it was super hard that the first Qunari Warden is just referred to as the Grey Warden. I was like, that's badass. That's a hard ass title.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate that. But I think the quest was also kind of impeded by the fact that you can't even get the quest in its entirety once you get access to the Ravane Coast. You do like the majority of the quest, then you hit a wall, and you can only complete the quest once you wrap up Tasha's companion quest, and that's when you can wrap up the quest. So I found the quest a bit frustrating in the way of like its structure, because I wanted to get the full story front to back at once, and then you hit a wall where you're like, oh, I have to go through this much of the game still, and this companion quest to even do this. And at that point, I was kind of disconnected. Um, so I found that to be a little bit frustrating for someone who wanted everything at once. I don't start a side quest to revisit it in 10 or 15 hours.
Yeah.
Um, but I did like the lore of like the Ravane Warden Fortress and it being in ruins and shambles and it being kind of built into this volcano partially and the loot tied to it. And they had like this legendary staff of some sort, like Meredith's kind of um, stinger or something like that. I don't know what it was, but it was a legendary weapon that was named after Meredith from Dragon Age 2, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool reference, but it's just a weapon title, so it's like, is this even really tied to Meredith? I don't know. Probably not. And yeah, I thought that content was good, but yeah, I don't really have too much to comment on like the actual Quinari Warden story itself, but I do like the representation of these old Warden fortresses scattered throughout Thedas. I think that was really neat, and it is plausible for how the Wardens are structured because they had a lot of blights in the north. I think the fourth one primarily took place in the north, on the eastern side in Ravane. So that was really super cool. But I don't have too much to comment on the actual Quinari Warden's story beyond that too much.
That makes sense. I was curious if you got anything extra out of it as a Canary Warden yourself, like not necessarily that you had to, but like if like I don't know, you had some kind of extra thingy that popped up about it or could talk about it with someone. But yeah, I also found that super frustrating. I remember I went back to the Grey Warden Fortress like multiple times, hoping I could now continue the quest, and I couldn't yet. I couldn't get to the next area, and I was upset about it.
Mm.
Which is a whole nother problem of some parts of the game. Not as much of a Grey Warden thing, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, I guess I can talk a little bit about what I thought about the Wardens. I'll try and keep it brief. Um, I really liked Anka and wow,
Yep.
Evka and Antoine. I thought they were really sweet. Again, they were a weird like warden representation for me, kind of in the same way that I felt maybe that you were talking about, but we're just kind of used to like bigger bigger warrior type wardens, so like or like just people with more presence. And I feel like Evka had a decent like presence, like she like took on the first warden, but they're like just I liked that they were not the typical warden example because I felt like that was like cool, but I also agree that like there is a bit of disconnect with like still the Origins Grey Warden like group and how they acted. But I really liked that Antoine was like a blight like studier. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think we've really seen that before, question mark. I can't quite remember.
Yeah. No, I
But
I did. I agree with your Antoine point. Like the whole idea of like treating the blight as an actual like biomedical condition that could be potentially studied and understood a bit more was really cool because the Grey Wardens as a organization just treat it as a thing, like a thing of nature, and they must respond to nature with this answer accordingly. But they don't really try to understand it. They're just like, let's throw bodies at this problem and see what happens. But I will say how that Antoine kind of like studying of the blight pays off, I think somewhat fell flat when you get to the, oh, there's just some big blight cysts up in Hogsburg wetlands, and it's like, oh, this is all we're really getting here. And so I was like, all this science and studying was somewhat not necessarily for naught, but it was just find the source of this thing and snuff it. Like it wasn't like we made a breakthrough. Like we understand the blight a little bit more, and now can do X thing or Y thing with regards to it, which I think could have been helpful if like that could have explained how people aren't affected by the taint in this game. That would have been a great answer if he was like, hey, I could make a salve of some sort that could help us resist the taint. It won't stop the call. The call will be inevitable, but if we were to get, or if a non-Grey Warden were to get, affected by the taint, this could potentially help preserve them without forcing them to do the joining or something neat like that. Like I would have wanted something a little bit more impactful along those lines, but it just turns into um, kill some blight wards. But yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
continue.
No, no, no. I agree. I just think like as we're kind of talking about, like a lot of the premise stuff is cool. Like, and I think they did a good job for most of the game of making it seem like maybe Antoine would have a bigger like impact. I felt like because a lot of stuff, a lot of the plot points in the game stem from like stuff in the Hosberg Wasteland or like talking with the wardens, and like talking with Evka and Antoine eventually like brings you to the next plot point. So I was hoping that like I don't know, maybe he would show up at the fucking lighthouse or whatever, which and like work with like Emmerich and Belara to like have some like thing we figured out something about the blight. That would have been sick. But yeah, I did really like them. I thought their little notes to each other were really like their note for if they die or when the calling takes them was a cool lore find. I liked the cauldron, as you said. I don't think I need to add anything on it. I think that was one of the coolest like places in the game. Um, and then just like one of my favorite little like side quests in the game is also the end though of the blight boils is when you find the area that has been um saved from the blight within the Osberg wasteland, and it's like all these flowers in this tree, and then if you come back after that, they have these flowers all over the city, and it's like remediating the blight, and I think that that is really beautiful and awesome. And they talk about like how the wardens can have potential for change, and I think that's really cool. I like the potential of that. We've yet to see how that plays out, but like I like the potential of it. Um, and um, we talked about this a little bit already, but the corrupt Weishaupt, really cool. Also, Weishaupt itself was one of the coolest parts of the game. I feel like this game in particular, out of like BioWare games, didn't give me as many times where I'm like, yes, like I actually genuinely feel like I'm like the protagonist, I'm the hero. Like this is like I feel like that. Like there's only been a few times where I'm like, holy shit, like I feel like a hero. Like that's insane. Like playing games, but like at Weishaupt when they think like when you win basically and everyone cheers, like that was one of the few times the games where it's like, oh my god, like we fucking did it. Even though we didn't do it, we quite literally did not do it. But you hurt Gillenane, you like fucking fight all these archdemon spawning fucking snake shit, and that's great. And for me, because I didn't punch the Grey Warden, because I didn't feel like I had enough standing in that room to sow more division, I just yelled at him, talked him down, and said, "Hey, this is your fucking responsibility. Get a fucking grip. You're blighted right now. Listen to Evka, basically." Um, and he stands down and listens to you. Um, he he tries to kill the archdemon. He's like, no, 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 Davrin, like, let an old man like do this. And because of that, like, you get this awesome moment where he still gets to like have his time of trying to kill the archdemon. Doesn't work, obviously, but then him ending up as an ally at the blighted Weishaupt is really cool. And him like resisting Asaya because of your like treatment of him was awesome. And then you only I think you only get the griffin feather if you save him. So that was cool that I got that because of him. Yeah, I didn't have as many qualms with the Grey Wardens as you did. The one thing that's like such a weird qualm to have that I have is I actually um I think it's fine for Evka and Antoine because they're like the two like main Grey Wardens you talk to, but like I felt like they should been more. I hate like the casual wear outfit. I actually like it, like the one that kind of looks like you're wearing a quarter zip, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like that felt really out of like character for the Grey Wardens to be wearing, which is such a dumb
All right.
critique.
You're done. We're done. We're
Yeah,
done.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. You did it.
I,
We did it.
we don't want more personal.
Okay.
Well, actually,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
really wanted, like, I really liked the little girl. I thought she was sweet. There's no fucking way she would have survived Weishaupt though, and her dad survived. Like, that's just fucking bullshit. But I like it. Whatever. Suspension of disbelief for that. But then I also really liked the idea of Flynn as the healer and like healing being like an essential part of the Grey Wardens also. I thought was an interesting thing, and I was curious if you had anything specifically to say about that. But like, you might not. But I liked him as like a fourth tier character.
Who specifically?
He was a doctor in the Habsburg Wasteland. He was from there, and then he did the joining and became a Grand Warden. And then Weishaupt happened and all this stuff, and so he ended up back there. And because he was trained as a physician in that area, he like told you where like the doctor's house was and everything, and he asked for you to gather some supplies and stuff. And he's just some guy, but you talked to him a few times about like how he wants to go back to being a physician for the people here, even though he's a Grey Warden, and how and Evka and Antoine are pretty supportive of him in that, like especially with like what's currently going on, and how he thinks that like being a doctor is still like um he gets like reassurance from Rook if you want to give it to him that like being a doctor is still like essential even like to the Grey Wardens as a Grey Warden. And I thought he was interesting.
Yeah, I don't really recall too much about the physician. And this goes into a separate topic, so I don't really want to tackle it right now because we've already spent roughly over half an hour on just the Grey Wardens. So I don't recall the physician all too well. I do remember the Hogsburg Wetlands flower quests, as well as the abandoned kind of like house, or no, it was like a mansion of sorts that has the demon in it during the
I
Hogsburg
forgot about
Wetlands.
that. Yeah.
And that whole setup that you have to take care of. But yeah, the physician himself, I don't have too much to add. In terms of like the Grey Warden content that's added based on that, I don't think there was super like a lot in terms of like, oh, this Grey Warden, my Grey Warden says a lot more based on this particular discussion, at least from what I recall. But I could be very much wrong. Again, Hogsburg Wetlands was an area that I kind of dove deep into early in the game, and that was like over a month ago, and so I don't recall. I don't recall the physician's assistant. I wish I could have better commentary on that, but I don't. I'd have to replay it or at least watch it.
He's like a character that is so not what even like a side character. He's like barely a side character. So like I'm not surprised you don't remember him. I just thought he was an interesting ancillary character, which I felt like we didn't get a ton of like really impactful like super ancillary characters, and so I did really like him.
Yeah, and yeah, okay, good stuff. I think we could talk about that more at a later point when we're not talking factions. Because let's move on to the next faction, the Morn Watch.
Morn Watch.
And I think you have a lot more to say on this, so I think I'll start and just be a little bit brief on it, because I don't think we should have a half hour per faction. But I understand that this is your faction, so if you want to go a half hour, we can do that. But not all the other ones. So for the Mornwatch, for me, very briefly, I thought conceptually, I thought they were very cool. I like how they add to the universe. Again, building off of like Dorian's Pact. or not pact, but his specialization in necromancy and having this group tied to it. And the Mornwatch not being just a group of necromancers, they're like creme de la creme of necromancers.
Yeah,
There's another name for just standard necromancers. I think it's like the Mortalitasi or something like that.
yeah,
Um,
mortal.
and so I like how they're like, yeah, there's even sub factions within this particular school of magic, which I don't think you really get in many other schools of magic within Dragon Age lore. So I thought that was really neat. And even then, you have the Mortalitasi, then you have the Mornwatch, and then if you graduate from that, you have the potential to become a Demi Lich. And part of me in my mind, I'm like, what if we do get another Dragon Age game, I would like them to explore a little bit more of like, if everyone's worthy of being a demi lich, what's the repercussions of having rampant liches around? Because it is like we all agree that we can make certain individuals immortal and give them this like insane undead kind of being status and power. So, is there? Well, how do they handle bad actors? How do they? Like, what is the structure of their society? So I thought that was compelling, and I didn't need an answer for that right away. I was just like, okay, I'd like to see this explored a little bit more because it's such a huge vertical within the Dragon Age lore that I'm like, they should talk about this a little bit more. But in terms of the actual Mornwatch and their role in the story, I appreciate how contained they are. They are pretty contained within the necropolis and all that type of stuff. But I wish we had more from them just in the way of like, I didn't get the dialogue, so not getting the dialogue, I get a lot of just the bounty hunter quests and addressing these spirits and stuff like that. And some of the quests were really cool of like having the pinnacle of its kind being like a fractured spirit that had like three facets of itself spread across Thetis manifesting, and you have to kill them so that it returns to the necropolis and forms into its true form, and you get the pinnacle of its kind quest. Like, I'm like, that's a very fascinating kind of like approach to how this super powerful spirit manifests itself in like this material way. And so how they talk about spirits and how they address, wisps and all that type of stuff, I thought was really cool, interesting content. And I almost would have wished we had more, or at least had quest lines that were more just talking in the garden and having discussions about how this works, because I think it is a super fascinating thing within Dragon Age lore, and I think there was a huge opportunity for that to be mined a bit more, because I definitely think the Mornwatch in principle and through certain aspects of the game, especially through Emmerich and Manfred as well, I think they're some of the most interesting new content that they bring to the not only Dragon Age universe, but especially just this game in particular. But that's where I kind of land at a high level with the Mornwatch, if you want to go from there.
Uh, I basically agree with everything you said. I loved being a member of the Mornwatch. I thought it was fucking great. I think I told you this a little bit, but I wanted to pick a faction that I didn't know much about or anything about was the goal. I was like, yeah, I don't know anything about the Mornwatch, that'll be great. And then I remembered that of the Book to Winter Nights, the specific stories I have read of it, because I really struggle to read anthologies. I just my attention sucks and I suck. Maybe now that I'm on Adderall, I'll try it again. And now that I've played Veilguard, I'll try it again. But one of the first stories in there is Down Among the Dead. Um, and like as I was reading Rook's backstory for Mornwatch, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, like whatever. And I was like, kind of sounds familiar. And then like I got like the words like Grand Necropolis a little more, and it like played around in my head. And I was like, oh my god, I do know the Mornwatch. I've literally read their story from Tevinter Nights. Um, so I thought that was kind of funny. That I wanted to pick a faction I didn't know anything about and ended up picking them, and I've literally read a whole fucking short story on them, which I haven't consumed a lot of ancillary Dragon Age content, so that's pretty funny. Um, but yeah, I loved the additional content I got as a Mornwatch player about Emmerich, talking with him about necromancy stuff and just the Necropolis in general and the Mornwatch in general was really great. And I know I got additional content because obviously you get your like little like your faction thing, but also like it showed up being like Emmerich is more willing to talk to you about like necromancy because of this. And so I know I got just like other options too. Um and you have some fun additional content with him of being like he's like, how did we never run into each other in the halls? And you're like, you can either say like I don't know, or you can be like, wait, there was this one time at this one speaker event, and he's like, oh my gosh, I did speak there. Oh, it's so great that we have like this in common, and like that's fantastic. And you can talk about like tending the garden. You're like, yeah, when I like was an initiate, like I did this or this or this, and he's like, oh, I remember that, and it's really sweet and great. He's like a cute mentor. I thought about romancing Emmerich because just I loved spending time with him, but it felt like I was like weirdly like flirting with my teacher and it felt wrong, so I was like,
You're a
no.
sick freak. You're a sick
I know.
freak.
I like flirted with him once and I was like, actually I'm gonna barf. I can't do this.
Yeah, you're into those
um
teacher types, you sick
no,
sicko.
I'm not. I'm not. I really am not. I was like, this is disgusting. um But I think if I wasn't playing a more watch background, that would be a fun romance to do.
Especially if you played an
I'm
older character. Actually, you did play a middle-aged character, so it wouldn't have been like completely off base. My rook was relatively young for a warden.
yeah, yeah. I like playing young characters sometimes, but I don't know. For this game specifically, like, no. Now we're going to talk about Rook. I won't do that. But I want to know actually more about the Morn Watch, which is why I'm like trying to look some stuff up genuinely right now because I'm really interested in the connection, if any, between the watching Solus's regrets and you getting the robes after like robe of like you getting the clothing item like Watcher's robe from each one. Like that
Mm-hmm.
like seems to imply like that like something about that was the start of to me it feels like something about those things is perhaps how the Mornwatch even started. Maybe like the original Lich or something was originally an ancient elf. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Never
But
mind.
like there
It's
seems to be
nice
a
to.
connection there that I either missed in some kind of missive, not a missive, but like codex entry or something. And so I'm looking forward to trying to figure that out because that was very interesting to me, especially everything about Vorgoth, like whatever they are. Um, they are just there's even some great like even with being Mornwatch member and like having Emmerich as like close friend, you know, by the end of the game. Um like bro even Emmerich is like, no one knows what Vorgoth is. Because you can ask, is Vorgoth a lich? And he says no. And so it's like, okay, but this is super funny. I'm just looking it up. Vorgoth speaks in all capital letters as possibly a reference to the personification of death in Discworld universe. And that would make a lot of sense because I have read what this is talking about. And that's super funny if Vorgoth is slightly inspired by that. Discworld is Terry Pratchett's book series. Very funny books. Not read them all, but I've read a few of them.
Yeah.
And Death is great in there. But no, I loved the Morn Watch. I thought there was a lot of like really actually just like beautiful things about um like tending the flowers and just like things that Emmerich says about death and the and spirits and the fade and all that stuff. Yeah, I also wish they were a little more integral to the game, which is why like I was really hoping there would be more of a link between the watchers of like the Morn Watch and then like watching Solus's memories like being called like I said watchers robes. Like I was hoping to get like a more plot based link at the end of that, but I didn't really we didn't really get that. I mean, Mythal's wearing one of the Watcher's robes, but like I'm not no like I'm not assuming that like she started it or like one of her vessels started it or some shit. Like there's no leap to make there, but like I was hoping for something.
I appreciate all
Um
the ties you're attempting to make with the Morn Watch and what they wear.
yeah.
This
Well,
is
no, 'cause, like, you know what I mean? Like, it would make sense based on like the type of like um you get faction-based outfits, right? And based on the faction-based outfits I can get, like I'm also like thinking about this. Um and yeah, like I don't know. Um but yeah, I loved all the stuff it introduced about spirits and, about how there was a lot more talk about just the good things about like spirits that I feel like we sometimes don't get because they so often become demons in Dragon Age. Um oh, and oh my God, this was important because I was thinking about this yesterday when we talked about the companions and we talked about spirits and taking like a spirit or demon like into you and how that like affects you. And I remember that like Wynn actually has a spirit in her for the whole game. And she only really tells you if you become like really close with her um and do all of her quest stuff. um but she has a spirit of healing, I believe, inside her, um which was very, very interesting. um but yeah, no, I also just wish the Born Watch was more integrated into the game. And I feel like if they were going to be as seemingly separate as they are, like I said before, like I kind of just wish they had um given them like even less, if that makes sense. Like I just don't know why we got so much like empty space to do nothing with them. Like I would have preferred like just a smaller chamber, like with like the main people that you talk to and a few other spots, like the garden and the big skeleton hall, which I really
yeah.
liked. And then, yeah. So that's what I'll say about them is that I really, really like them and I hope for more.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very close to saying that the Morn Watches, I would want to classify them as a lost opportunity because they lay the groundwork for so many interesting things to pull on and build off of. And I really think that they had something, and I don't know if they just didn't know what they had or they didn't know what to do with what they had, but I think what they build around the Morn Watch is unfortunately kind of underwhelming. Just with the bounty quests, just with having Vorgoth there, and you're like, we can't do much with him. And granted, you get a bit more as a Morn Watch representative, so I understood that I lost out on certain opportunities and certain dialogue choices that I think would have been a bit more fulfilling. But in terms of a plot structure and kind of like an arc with how you help that faction, I think they kind of underhand the fucking coolness of this group.
Yeah.
Just
Oh, and
necromancy in general, and just the necropolis in general, and the cool parts of the necropolis are actually cool. And it's like,
yeah.
okay, well, we're not doing a lot with this, and that's sad a little bit.
The other thing I wanted to say about it was you said about like can we make anyone a lich and all this stuff, and like that was not how I interpreted it at all. It was like based on like the dialogue I got, was like, no, not anyone can become a lich. Like it's kind of actually almost like the joining a little bit. Like you likely won't survive the process of becoming a lich, and also like not only will you probably not survive the process of becoming a lich, you will also probably not find the method to become a lich. It seemed like it was supposed to be like the reason Hezenkoth and Emmerich are even like basically as old as they are is part of the thing for becoming a lich. Like you need a process of like trying to find all the information yourself because it's not documented anywhere. You need to figure out how to do it and then do it and then survive doing it to become a lich. And even on top of that, they gave Emmerich the ultimatum of like, hey, actually, you have this spirit friend. We could bring them back, but then you can't become a lich. And so I think it is interesting though to like consider like, Emmerich becomes a lich and he's not necessarily super quiet about it, you know. probably to the rest of the world he is, but he does tell like all the companions and stuff. Like if it did become more well known, would more people try it, and then would more liches just be around? I think is a really interesting question. On if that could happen, because it seemed like there was only a handful from what it seemed like to me.
Yeah, and I think there are two key things there. Is one is that it's seemed like, and then the second thing is, all it takes is one. Like we're talking about immortality within the Dragon Age universe, which is something that even the Magisters, the guys that were trying to make it to the Golden City, aka the Evanuris. Oh well, no, they're not the Evanuris, but the original Magisters, they couldn't crack the code on. The Evanuris don't have immortality. I mean, they technically have immortality by way of their archdemons, but there is a group or a faction of these people that are part of the Mornwatch that can be graduated or inducted into this immortal group. And I'm saying that if we're talking about the span of immortality, then we have technically through all of time to add to this group or faction. So to only think that there's only 3 or 4, I think is somewhat ignorant. And that's not to discredit Emmerich, but Emmerich is just an old professor that through just accepting the loss of Manfred became graduated. I don't think Emmerich had had the most rigorous set of trials to become a demi-lich, in my opinion. So that's why I'm just curious of like how spanning is this faction, if at all, and what is the risk of having a lich that just was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do things this way. So I do think that's something that's worth exploring or get more clear answers on, and just feeds into the whole like lost opportunity of like, I wish we could have gotten more in that respect. But I digress. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I think we did the thing.
I think so.
I'm ready to move on to the Antivan Crows.
Let's do it.
Antivan Crows, assassin, super society, super army of Treviso. Really.
Like,
sorry, go ahead.
no. Actually, say what you're gonna say. I feel like I just wanted to like preface with. I feel like I have a lot to say about them. Just yeah. So
Okay.
go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Antivan Crows, from what I had in my mind versus what they are, I feel like are somewhat two different things. I think I had an understanding that they are a faction of I knew that they protected Treviso in some way, shape, or form. Like they are so ever present, but yet they're not like a formal army of some sort. But even with that in mind, I don't think I would have pictured how they operate within Treviso. And that's to say that I think the Crows and in as a parallel, I think the Antom both are just kind of dumb. And that's to say, like, I don't know why. I guess I had this idea that the Antivan Crows or any group of assassins would be a lot more subtle or hidden, but they have their own somewhat uniforms. They're always on a rooftop, and they are always in the hot gossip. And so it's like, okay, so we're assassins by nature of the job, but like, you know who I am, you know where I live. Like, pull up, you can see where we're at. So in that sense, it was like, okay, so how did the Shadow Dragons become more low key than the Antivan Crows? Like, I think that's so odd in terms of how that works. And secondly, I think and I know you're gonna go really deep on this, but I'm gonna take the first stab at it. I think the fucking zip lines is cool for the first 10 seconds, and then you're like, this is so fucking dumb. Just in the way of like, so you guys, you're only assassins by the way of how you navigate rooftops, and I get it, like that's some Assassin's Creed type shit, but like the Assassin's Creed, the difference is that there are no zip lines. The assassins just use the rooftops because that's how 1400s Italy was built. That was how Jerusalem was built. That was how Paris was built. You know, like we have infrastructure of super tightly knit buildings and structures that allow assassins to navigate them like this. Whereas Treviso, somehow someone is paying for these zip lines to be put up for all these assassins, and it's like, how does the society enable these assassins? Like, they have no need for an army. They're just like, yeah, let's just keep rocking with this assassins group, even though if we don't get along with them, they will literally kill us. So in that sense, it's like, is the power structure just completely in the Antivan Crows' hands? And so touching on the Antam part, like, how do you take over Treviso and insist that like you're occupying it, but you look at all these fucking zip lines and you're like, just leave them up, dog. Just leave them up. Like they'll come down eventually. And it's just like it kind of cheapens again the Quinari just species as a whole of just like making them look so much dumber than they actually are. And it really took me out of it with the whole butcher stuff, because it's like, dog, you don't even know how to lead this fucking group. I don't care what you're saying right now. You have been running a shit show of an occupation in terms of how you've been handling this. And I let Treviso fall to the Blight, and I think that had some really good visual stylings and taste to it. But in terms of how it impacted the Antivan Crows, it was very, business as usual for the most part. Even though people were kind of, down on their luck and all that type of stuff. Like, the visual stylings is cool, but I wish the game did more in the way of showing the progress you were making. Like, if you built the faction strength, or if you did all the quests in Treviso, it would have been nice to at least see Treviso clear out the Blight over time. And maybe not fully, like, restore it back to normal. I'm not even asking for that. But at least something in the way of, like, oh, you did all the side quests. You built the faction to full strength. There's only a couple of Blight Sis or Blight Boils in the area. So I thought that was a lost opportunity to show the player, communicate to the player, hey, you've done a lot of work around here. As a token of appreciation, here's progress being made. And so I thought that was a lost opportunity. And finally, to touch on the Antivan Crows and their faction quest line, with the whole like saving the governor stuff, like, and the governor being the kind of like foil that sacrificed Treviso to the Antam, I did not care. I was like, okay, evil politician. I'm like, we get it. And it just didn't really land for me. I didn't really feel it, or I wasn't at a disconnect. And I think I tackled that later on in the game, such that it was like I was already ready to get to the third act. So that's where I was at with it. And that's all I want to really say at the Antivan Crows at a high level, and I'll let you get your shit off.
Well, yeah, let's just say a lot of that I agree with. What I wanted to touch on was like, and this is again like kind of a specific, but it's like the Antivan Crows, we know they, in lore, seem to be a little more, and as you said, like subtle, and I would be inclined to agree. Like, they're very just like, and granted, we're on their turf, yeah, but it's like during an occupation, like, they're just so, like, they, gosh, in like the lore, like, they have like, they like basically still like kidnap children and like train them to be crows or whatever, and like that's like very non-existent in the game, which is, I guess, whatever. And like part of it is like, they seems like even Taya and Viago kind of like talk about like bringing the crows like back to their roots. So at least they kind of like talk about that, and the roots apparently was like overthrowing some kind of evil government body, and that was the origin, like one of the origins, part of the origins of the crows. But even the crows' origins, they were a lot more like exclusive, or not exclusive, but solitary, and like a lot more distant from the center of the culture. So I think it is very funny that they like live above a casino and have this very lavish lifestyle, when they're like trying to then kind of like connect back to that alleged like beginning of their organization, within the lore. Um, yeah, that they're assassins, and I wish there'd been a little more like discussion, I guess, of the moral grayness of the crows. like within the context of Dragon Age as a whole, and like the backstabbiness, like they talk about like this isn't time for like the crow like bullshit of like stabbing each other in the back and all kind of stuff. And like obviously Ilario is doing that, but like he's still, I don't know, it just was like, yeah. Like that was mostly my main thing, was like this like weird disconnect between the crows in general and the crows in this game is what I felt. And at least we know that like Zebron, for example, did like love Antiva, and that like much is very very clear. Like they all deeply care about that, their city and their country. Um, and so like maybe this is a return to their like their form, their original roots. They talk about how like, you know, on Antiva currency, or Antivan currency, it's like not rulers, it's something else. I don't remember what they say, but
Yardsticks.
yardsticks. Yeah. Um, I don't know. They felt like weirdly arrogant in a way that I didn't really feel from the other factions at all. Like like the Veil Jumpers as a good example, like they feel super weak and they know they're super weak. Um but the crows were like, we don't need help except from you, Rook. Like it was very weird. And then they do get help from other factions in the Lords of Fortune send them equipment and stuff because the city's under siege. Like that's why. But like it is very strange. They're like, no, we're not going to seek any help, or we're not going to work with the government to like, even though obviously we do find out like the governor is the one that like helped the Antom like get in. Like they're like, no, we're not gonna do this or that or the other thing to try and like ease the burden of the occupation. We want to cut it off at the head and have us be the ones, which I don't know, like if that's the way that they should go about it, but that's what they decided to do. Um, but yeah, I wanted like Jacobus is like a really interesting character because he is like a sourpuss the whole game because obviously his cousin dies and he has no other family, and he uh, like reveres Rook a little bit for finishing his cousin's contract and for saving him. But the entire game he's like, I'm gonna get him, like I want revenge and all the things. And then he comes in at the end and is like, but instead of revenge, I'm gonna do this. And it's like it didn't feel like we got enough like lead up to him to be like so big in like the final like taking down of the governor, which I also just didn't give a shit about the governor. Like I totally knew that he was a bitch the whole time because we know he's a bitch the whole time. Which was kind of the whole thing with the crows the entire time, was like the person who's the double agent or the bitch here is obvious the whole time, which felt really weird for a group of assassins. Like to have like no actual stakes, really felt really clear what the problem was. But the zip lines are like a whole other thing that like
Before you go on to
I
the
don't.
zip lines, I want to
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about the just one little point, which is
Yeah.
why is this group of assassins? Why is the plot structure around this group of assassins not based around, hey, how do we find the butcher and kill just him? Like, why isn't it just an assassin plot line in the traditional sense of, like, for a
Yeah.
group of assassins, they treat themselves and you as like the one group army, and they're like, oh, kill all the Antam and help us clear them out. And it's like, why isn't a group of assassins, why don't we just find the butcher, kill him, and then see how the Quinari get out? And it was like a weird disconnect of like, these assassins they don't be doing a lot of assassinating really. And to build upon that, like, I felt like a lot of their plot line was really based around like saving a lot of different crows. And it's like, isn't one of the core tenets of being an assassin is that you are a slippery motherfucker that can't be killed? That's why you're allowed to be these like pseudo one-man armies that work in the shadows. And yeah, so there was like disconnects, and like this is, I think they did Zevron no favors in hindsight in terms of like, you guys are just kind of chilling. You guys are just there, and not really that compelling. But what with Zevron and how he talks about the crows and how he builds upon them is like way more grandiose and compelling and intriguing than how this game really delivers on that vision and dialogue,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of disappointing. But I will let you continue on with the zip lines, but I wanted to insert that.
No, I agree, and I think that's a good thing to say. Add it like, yeah, I think that's what I was hoping a little more from the crows was to like understand like in a weird way, kind of even what you're saying about the Grey Wardens is like there's a certain like level of like honor and like an assassin like contract that like there we do kind of get in the game. Like Lucanus is like, I never abandoned a contract and I failed because I didn't like kill my contract and all the things, and like Jacobus being like, you have to finish my cousin's contract. But like there wasn't as much decorum and just like how they acted and kind of like what I expected. Um like they just kind of hung around and acted like all the other factions, and I was kind of like, but what? And I forget where I was going, but like yeah, there's just, yeah, I don't know. Like they're on top of a casino, and Katarina has a mansion, and that's about all we get of like the grandioseness of the crows. um And I think it would have been almost more compelling to have there not be an occupation and the crows go from zero from hero to zero like with a blight dragon than them have this problem that seems kind of a little weirdly superficial, because it feels like the crows could probably take the problem out quicker than in the game by what they say. And also weird that Rook ends up doing a lot of it considering their like power within the city and country as a whole. But I don't know.
It would have been nice if if you didn't save Treviso, you like lost some assassins and you had to take some actual contracts around Northern Thetis to kill some people, that are figures that are of note. Like it's another thing in which we have the Mornwatch kind of serving that purpose of like go around the continent and kill these specific creatures for this particular contract. And it's like, why couldn't this be a Lords of Fortune thing? And then the Antivan Crows, it's like, why aren't I doing more hits for the Antivan Crows? Because we didn't save their country, or their we cost a lot of Antivan Crows' lives, and now contracts are building up in some sense. Like I have no problem saving Treviso and building onto that, but it's like we have this Crow faction and you can't do hits, which is super odd and within an RPG. Like no sneaking into a palace to kill this one specific guy. Like you get the one gal that you have to kill, whatever her name is. I have Zara.
Well, that's the person who kidnapped Lucanus that you do kill, but I don't know if that's who you're talking about.
Yeah, that's kind of a hit in a way, but it's tied to Lucanus' storyline. It's not even an Antivan Crow hit, and so it's just, I don't know. I think it's a lot of lost opportunities here.
Yeah, I would have liked to see some actual like, I don't know, it sucks because like I get that like you want to like kind of try and stay in the genre style that you're in the whole time, but like wouldn't it have made sense like to have like a few like, I don't know, time-based sneak quests as a crow, like, instead of just doing everything in the same combat style. Like sure, you'd have to have like a different like like either you have to add a sneak mechanism to the game, which I don't think is necessary. I think just like, can you like hop around like these areas without like, I don't know, a light landing on you, like have like a strobe light like going so then they'd see you. Like I feel like that would have been easy enough to add to make you feel more assassiny. And I feel like getting to the zip lines, like like it makes sense in my head. The zip lines make sense. There's something again that we've talked about a lot. It makes a lot of sense on paper. Um, like I like getting around the city fast, quickly, and from a high area makes a lot of sense. But when you're under occupation, there's no way in hell the Antom are not taking that shit down. There's just no way. And I feel like there's a few areas in the city that you could still have them. Um, and be like, this is like over like a bank of water here, and like, or like behind some buildings that are like harder to get to, like, or like a smaller zip line between like two different size buildings. Like, I feel like you could do that, it makes sense, but it's just not very logical that they would exist within that city. And like my more bigger thing on the zip lines is a lot more involved, but I feel like if you wanted to keep them in the city so bad, there's a few different times where like zip lines are locked. It's like, and I know it'd be just like a little bit of an extra step, but like, can it look like the Antom destroyed the zip line then instead of it just being locked? Like, can't we like make it seem a little more environmental storytelling rather than just like randomly right now you can't go across this? Like, that just is really just a little unfortunate for me.
Bro, how do you lock
Because,
down a zip line? Just go.
well, that's the thing. It's like it's like you literally, yeah, like you can't go across it right now for whatever reason. And it's like, okay, fucking take down the line or something at least. Like, so like that makes sense. Like it's just like the zip line you can't use right now. I'm like, what? It's
Yeah.
literally right there.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? And I think that that is a little annoying. Because like obviously some of those like fade gates or whatever, like they put the little lock on it, like you can't go through right now, like sure, fine. um or like you can't find the mechanism right now, like fine. But like that kind of stuff is so this kind of stuff is so frustrating because it's like, no, there's no logical reason I can't go across this right now. Like, you are just telling me I can't, and that's fine, but give me like an environmental reason I can't. Um, and there are plenty of reasons that I can't use this right now within the city. Literally knock it down. Literally show me the Anton fucking destroyed the zip line, and the crows have to make me go on a fucking fetch quest or pay like them 5 bundles of wood or some shit to rebuild it. Like,
Yeah.
um, I that was just kind of like the like more just make it feel like I'm actually working with assassins and not just like another general resistance group. Like, I don't know. I feel like they wanted to add more nuance to the crows because, the crows are like, this group of assassins who have done kind of bad things in some of the past Dragon Age games, and they wanted to be like, look at, they're good guys. But it's like, I would rather not had them be just good guys, you know? Not, they didn't need to be villains, but they didn't need to be like morally upright either, and they kind of were, and that was weird. It just felt like a really major disconnect for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's all.
Okay. If that's all we have on Antivan Crows, I'm ready to move on to the next group, which I don't have too much to add. But if you're ready
Yeah,
to
we're
go,
we're all good. Ready to go.
Shadow Dragons, an actual group that values their privacy and secrecy. Um,
Uh,
which I think is both like an interesting thing, but how it is implemented in the game is like they're because they're so secretive and like in the shadows, living up to their name. I feel like they're not really there. They're just kind of there. Like you teleport, you use the Illuvian to get to Docktown, and you have the little room. And I'm always running to get out of the room because I have to do shit in Docktown. And so I'm just walking past all the shadow dragons. I'm like, oh, what's up, guys? What are you doing? Oh, nothing. Please help us out. And it's like, oh, okay. So uh, so I think in terms of shadow dragons, I don't have much to say because they don't do much really. Like it's they're just there, and that's the really most that I can say about them. I would be interested to get input from someone who had played the Shadow Dragon faction background for their rook and see how they enjoyed that, and what that lent them in terms of at least Tevinter related dialogue or Minrathous related dialogue or Magisterium related dialogue, whatever the case may be. See what they had to say. But as far as how they're implemented and how they work in the shadows, I'm like, I don't know. I don't have too much to say because I didn't really care or know, or I don't really know how they were even really involved with the plot. It's just saving Minrathous and stopping the thread and all that type of stuff. Or you can work with the thread for a bit. So that's really all I have to say on the Shadow Dragons.
That's interesting because for my playthrough, it's for my playthrough, if you don't save Minrathous, you don't really ever stop the threads. You kind of just end up working with the threads, like as a partner. And I felt like that was very interesting. For better or for worse, like you work with the threads because they are, at least an organization left in the city. If you don't save Minrathous, literally all the ancillary shadow dragons get hung, and they're all dead, which feels horrible. Um, I will say that was one of the actual like things about the game that did feel kind of gutting. I felt really fucking terrible about it. I was like, oh shit, like that is the consequence of my choice. Holy fuck. Um, do I feel better about it being like people who like had their lives on the line for cause than the civilians? Not really. That was kind of like the reasoning behind my choice, and it didn't really make me feel better. And I was like, damn, that sucks. It really just sucked. I felt like shit for it, but I deserved it. Um, I don't know if I deserved it. I mean, it is like a you can't win choice really. Like if you, I mean, I don't really know what happens to Treviso, but like you said, it's some cool visuals and stuff. But allegedly, a lot of civilians were gonna die, and I assume that that's the case. Um, but yeah, yeah. If you don't save Minrathous, the Shadow Dragons are basically annihilated, except for the Viper, who literally gets blighted, and then just lives the whole game, even though he has correspondence with the Grey Wardens, and they're like, "We will give you the joining ritual, like, don't die," and he just doesn't seem to respond to that. Um, and then that other main guy from the Shadow Dragons also doesn't die. He's around. He blames you, and Viper says, "Don't blame Rook." Um, and then Maevaris and Dorian also don't die, but they don't show up till the end then. So the Shadow Dragons were essentially non-existent in my playthrough, and I didn't realize I'd actually not done the Study in Docktown quest um, prior to the fall of Minrathous, so I missed Nev's first like companion quest. So of course she fucking hated me. Um, which is why I ended up really liking her character, funny enough. But uh, yeah, I also don't have much to say about the Shadow Dragons because, as far as I know, they're all dead. Hello?
I'm just taking it all in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Interesting to hear that they do stay as like mysterious and shadowy throughout the whole game, though. That almost less so than the crows, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, they're not hanging, but they're certainly hanging out. And so, in terms
Jesus
of,
Christ.
all right, my bad. Uh, so their presence is only contained really to that room and their side quests, faction quests. Like their faction strength goes up, but I don't. It's like that's I guess a general problem. What I have is like how the game represents faction strength. It's like what is faction strength truly? Because they don't. The faction doesn't really evolve over the course of the game, or not evolve if you don't do anything for the game. And so its representation really just feels like a slide bar that you need to get bigger for the end game.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it kind of cheapens of like, well, why am I really doing this? I don't necessarily know why I'm doing this outside of I know I have an end game and I want the best ending. And so, yeah, I really don't have too much to say on the Shadow Dragons, and I have no problem with moving on from them, honestly. That's
Yeah.
where I'm at with them.
That's me too. My dad just called me, and he called me a little earlier in our conversation, so I
All right. So, is there anything else that you would want to add about the Shadow Dragons?
know I'm all good.
All right, let's move on to the Veil Jumpers. And I'll let you get going. I'll let you start.
Sure. Yeah, the Veil Jumpers, they needed they're the little damsels in distress a little bit.
Yeah.
They're sweetie pies. That's they need a lot of help, and that's okay. Yeah, I felt like Strife and Ireland were the weakest of the faction leaders, I think. Isabella would be probably arguably pretty weak if it wasn't for the fact that she's her. She doesn't do a ton as like a faction leader because the Lords of Fortune don't do a ton. Um, Not that the Mornwatch faction leaders do a ton, but they're just Vorgoth is compelling because he's an entity. Um, I felt like Ireland's voice actress was kind of not my favorite. Probably one of my least favorite acted characters in the game. Strife was fine. I liked him for the most part. Um, but yeah, the Veil Jumper's very strange to me because they do talk about how they're a new group. They just kind of popped up with like I'm assuming since the hole in the sky is kind of when their shit started. Um, and you can tell they're new, and I do appreciate that, like, because they're not an established group, like, they clearly need a lot more help, like, that I think is decent storytelling, but, like, it felt weird because it didn't feel like they were really giving anything back to you, and not that, like, I really cared about that, but it was more of like I'm helping the Veil Jumpers than they're helping me, which is fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
but
weird
go ahead.
juxtaposition of like this group kind of, and not to like shit on them, but they seem somewhat helpless with,
Yeah.
just existing in their current form. That it's like, why would I want to build your faction strength for the end game? Because the end game is only worse for you guys. Like, you guys seem just, all of you guys are low level, and none of you guys are ready for the end game. So like, why should I help you guys outside of like, I know I need to help you guys. I'm the good guy, all that type of stuff. So in terms of that, I was like very kind of like leery of why am I really doing this? And they give you, I wish they could have given us more of like, oh, here's, because you did this, here's some elven artifacts or something like that. Or give
Yeah.
something to Balara and contribute something more to Balara. For how cool their name is and what their name implies, I'm shocked by how we're not dealing with the Fade more. It seems like the Veil
Yeah.
Jumpers as a group exists so that we can have these cute little portals every once in a while, but they only really use the cute little portals for that. Like, when you're helping the Veil Jumpers, that's the only time that those portals really matter. It's not like Veil Jumpers are essential to a core part of the final act. There's not really much veil jumping that needs to occur. It's just kind of like we're helping you so that you guys help us in the end game, but you as an organization haven't proven that you can even really help yourselves. And it's such a weird, odd juxtaposition of all these different dynamics that is going on. I do think Strife is neat. I don't remember the other gal that's with Strife, but she's there. And I think Strife in my game actually dated Emmerich, which I
Yeah.
thought was super super neat in premise, but I don't think it was done well whatsoever. I think Strife basically walks onto a scene into a scene in the crossroads one day, and it's like, oh, I'm here to for our date, Emmerich, or some shit like that, and I'm like, this kind of just came out of nowhere. And again, going into how unearned a lot of these relationships are, it's just like there's nothing that I could do to like even sniff out that this was gonna even happen or do anything like that. Like, how cool would it have been if we had like an Emmerich dialogue option, and when you go talk to Emmerich, he's not even in his room, and you have to talk to Manfred, and we're like, Manfred, where's Emmerich? And he's like, oh, he only says the word gone. He just says gone or some shit like that. And it would have been cool to set that up of like, oh, Emmerich sneaks out and he goes somewhere we don't know where he
With
goes to,
who?
or we get like hints of like You know, what if we saw a veil portal close at some point and it's like, oh, did someone just jump through a little veil portal out of the crossroads? Like, I wish we had something that, like, set up that this was a relationship that's going to happen as opposed to, hey, Emmerich, are you ready for our date? And it's like, oh, shit. Like, this is kind of coming out of nowhere, but I guess get your shit off. So, I have more to say about the Strife Emmerich relationship than really the Veil Jumpers. Besides, like they're like fucking paperweights in this game. Um, so yeah, it's very interesting, but that's how I feel about the Veil Jumpers.
Yeah, I don't think I have more to add than that, even, which is kind of sad. It's just kind of like they're like the kind of what's weird about it is that like because I don't even have more to add, it's like I don't even like dislike them really. Like they're not even it's not even the same thing as the Lords of Fortune where I'm like they shouldn't even fucking be there. It's like they are so weak and I wish it was almost acknowledged more how fucking miserable they are. Like it's in a way that's like it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just they need so much help.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know, it's so bizarre.
it is very interesting, and yeah, I don't really know what to add, and so I'm not gonna add any more. I'm ready to move on. So
Yeah, I'm ready to move on.
yeah, so let's call that the factions because I think we went through all of the factions. I'm glad that we were allowed to deep dive on the Grey Wardens and the Morn Watch in largely a positive sense. And Teven Crows, there
Yeah.
was a lot to talk about, but I think a lot of it was more scrutiny than what I think we would have liked, and
Yeah.
the everything else is just there in varying degrees. But I will pick the next topic, and I think since we're on the topic, we spoke about companions, we spoke about factions. I'm gonna keep with the trend of not actually talking about the game, and
Fuck yeah.
I'm gonna say let's talk about Rook and who Rook
Ooh.
is and the character of Rook, and I think we're going to pace this out to actually be roughly a 2 hour discussion, which works out perfectly because I think we can give a good half an hour, plus to talk about Rook. So I think Rook is a very interesting character with what this game is, and what I mean by that is, you from the jump, Varric picks you, and you being Rook, and he knows your role and what you're going to become to be, just with how the game sets you up, and I don't think this game does enough just within the prologue of why it has to be you and not the Inquisitor, besides that the Dragon Age games rotate protagonists. So besides the fact that we rotate protagonists, it's very interesting to have a character such as Rook lead this effort and not the Inquisitor when the Inquisitor is such a presence. Like, it's interesting how the Inquisitor is just assigned to the south, and it's like, but you can actually set up that the Inquisitor has a relationship with Solus, and so they're going to forego that relationship and trying to reason with him and settle with him for the purposes of saving the South as just one individual. And the Inquisitor, mind you, at this point in the story, is basically a Rook because they don't even have their closing Fade Portal power. They're just a leader of this band, and they're also in the same position of just kind of being a guy or a girl. And I because they actually have a more stronger tie to the plot, I'm very shocked that how they write them off, I think, is very interesting, so to speak. But we settle with this Rook character, and I'll say that the Rook character creator is fantastic. Definitely the best character creator in any Dragon Age game. I think what you're allowed to create, and how you can design your characters is a top 3 character creator in all of RPGs, which is an interesting juxtaposition for what I'm gonna get into. So I think the character creator is fantastic. I like how this game kind of borrows the Origins thing where you have 6 different backgrounds to choose from, except this is faction based instead of like race based and I guess economic class based, which was Origins, where you could be a commoner dwarf or a caste dwarf, or you could be you know, a Dalish elf or an elf in alienage or a circle mage and stuff like that. So you had a variety of different choices for based on your class and race within Origins. This one takes a little bit differently with the factions. I wish we had gotten a prologue sequence that sets up your rook, because I think it
Yeah.
is I think this game just starts a little too hot on its heels with the whole ritual sequence, and I think that kind of does not do it favor, because you start so hot and you go into such a cooling pattern after the ritual that it's almost jarring in some sense. So I really wish it had borrowed more from Origins in the way, like, we play out our origin depending on if you're Morn Watch, Grey Warden, or whatever the case may be, and then you after your event with your faction and you introduce your faction characters maybe during those quests, you then do the Varric finds you, similar to how Duncan finds you. And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to need you for this mission, and you look like you're the right one for it. And instead of having a joining sequence, you have this joining of Varric sequence. And that takes you to Minrathous. And it's like, we have traced these we've had these hints and clues, and we think he's here. And as soon as you pull up, you have the bar sequence again, and then you lead into all that, and you see the Soulless Ritual. I think that would have been a better build-up for who not only your rook is, but also how the game is going to be paced, because I do think it jumps a little too hot. And I felt like Origins would have been the same. What if would happen if you just picked your background and you just started at Ostagar with the joining? And it's like, you wouldn't have that
Yeah.
much. You wouldn't have had that much of a tie to not only your background characters, but also the events of what happens at Ostagar. You wouldn't have that build up in a more meaningful way. So I think that was a lost opportunity in some sense with Rook. But going back to Rook as a character, I find it super fascinating to have arguably the best character creator in all games, depending on who you talk to and their tastes. We can have, even going to the point with having trans surgery scars, I think was like such a fascinating inclusion and very inclusive for a character creator to do. You have also the 4 races. You have, you can have non-binary pronouns. Like, they do so much with creating your identity, which is, I think, such an interesting juxtaposition, because no matter how many permutations of the Rook character you create in the character creator, and with the faction that you assign your Rook to, the actual Rook character is easily by far the most one-dimensional Dragon Age protagonist we've had, to the point where I think they're just kind of dry and boring for the majority of the game. I think the characters around Rook are a lot more compelling than Rook themselves, and maybe that's true for a lot of just Bioware games, is like, you want to have companions that are really compelling, but I think the only thing that makes your Rook compelling is how they talk about their past. But even then, they only talk about their past really with Varric, who is dead, and technically like an aspect of Soulless, and a manifestation of your memories. And you talk about your past with Soulless himself. So Rook in of themselves, I think, is a letdown in how RPGs are kind of designed, because it is so front loaded with so much choice and agency and what you're allowed to really do in terms of representing your Rook. But when it comes to dialogue choices and the choices you're allowed to make and how you roleplay your Rook, I found a lot of the times being kind of deflated by this happy-go-lucky chipper attitude, and we'll say largely the absence of choice that is consequential or meaningful. And Yeah, that's what I have to say at a high level with Rook, and I'll let you carry the baton from there. But I was kind of let down with the Rook character.
Yeah, this is actually wild because as I'm trying to write my review yesterday, I was saying a lot of very similar things. I'm actually almost surprised how similar. And I was having a hard time wording exactly what I wanted to say, so I'm trying to pull it up. I start talking about the role playing aspect of the game. Um, and um, I get into some other things about role playing as well. So I'm trying to get to the part about Rook specifically. Rook feels a bit too open to interpretation for me is something that I was trying to like figure out what I wanted to say about, but like there's a little too much of me just not having established anything by the time that I'm into the game where I'm meeting my companions where I'm like I don't really know anything about me. I know what my background is, but like you said, I didn't live it. I just know what it was. Um, I don't necessarily know why my rook cares to be here. I know I had a relationship with Varric that was apparently very close, and I've been with Varric for the better part of a year, allegedly, but I don't I didn't get to experience that. You could tell a bit by like how like close he spoke with me, but like I as like the player don't know that, and as a player I already have a connection with Varric as someone who's played the other games, but like I didn't know if they were banking on that or not because I'm still not sure who the audience of this game really is. Um, and so at some points it felt like it was Dragon Age fans, and at some point it felt like it was trying to, like let in other people, and maybe it was trying to do both, but I'm not quite sure. And I think that also muddied Rook because they want you to have a character that you can put your own thoughts and beliefs and ideals onto, but that's hard when you then need to like also have the character be able to act upon those things. And I would rather get told a little bit about the character than kind of not be given an idea quite at the beginning. Like Solus asks you like why should like you be the one to do this? And for me there's not like a better answer than well because I'm the one that's here. And like as a player even when I got that I was like I don't know. Like I don't know. Like I don't know what Rook was like in the Mornwatch. I guess I kind of have to decide now. Um and for the Mornwatch faction, like I haven't interacted with anyone in my faction at that point. So and I haven't had any like faction-based dialogue really besides like placing down the items in Rook's room, and I get that that's like part of the character creation process kind of is like going through those items and what they mean to you, but like that wasn't enough for me to like understand Navara or like our culture. And so like I didn't really like know like I like didn't I hadn't even decided like did I grow up in Navara? Like was it my plan to be part of the Mornwatch my whole life? Like I was an elven rogue in the Mornwatch. Um I almost wish it had been a bit more restrictive actually with which factions you could choose. Like obviously as a dwarf you can't play a mage. I think it's good that they like include that still, but like maybe you had to be a fucking mage to be in the Mornwatch or something, or like I don't think in Dragon Age we've ever seen a dwarven and Teven Crow. Like maybe you couldn't be a dwarven and Teven Crow. Um, and there's stuff about like inclusion there, like if they had done that, but like trying to understand like what does a non mage do in the Mornwatch? I have no fucking idea. I still don't know. Like, you know, and I think that that made it hard in a lot of ways to connect with the overall arc of Rook. I feel like I um didn't really understand Rook, even though like I knew the spoiler that Varric was dead the whole game. Like I was aware of that, but I feel like I didn't really understand Rook um until going through the fade scene and when you're trapped in the cage and getting to talk with Varric and mourn Varric. Which again I can talk about the irony of the Mournwatch background character not recognizing their own grief and mourning process, or Harding's mourning process, or even Nev has many lines where like you can tell that she feels remorse for what happened. Like when you do her Docket Town quest, she talks about, now that I've redone it, she talks like about how like maybe she should have just said no to Varric in the first place. And it's like, well, she like kind of she doesn't regret it, but she's kind of like, man, but she kind of regrets it. Um she like I'm like, damn, like there's all this like stuff going on, and like the Mornwatch character didn't fucking notice. Are you kidding me? I have a disconnect with that for sure. Um, or like Emmerich not noticing that Rook is like going through this. Like that is super wild to me. Um, and yeah, like we talked about, like the Inquisitor, like they like lose a little bit of their memory, but I felt like the Inquisitor had so many more options to be like, well, why the fuck do I have to deal with this? Like, why is this my responsibility? Whereas, and like that made a lot of sense for the situation they were in, and also like you still couldn't like leave, like like with the situation you're in, like you really can't leave. And then by the time you like could leave, you hypothetically likely are now invested in the Inquisition and your place in the Inquisition because of what you've been through. I think the game, yeah, it just starts you. I understand why I feel like I understand why the game wants to start you off so hot. Like, the joining is like a huge thing to start, like with Inquisition, not with Origins, and you ripping open the fucking sky and Inquisition and all the shit. But like, if you're right, like if the game had started with Rook's backstory, that still would have been a big fucking thing, big enough to get them basically dismissed from their faction, and then you would actually feel like you have history with your faction. Like I was confused. Like, am I supposed to be mad at my faction because I like got dismissed for doing something right? Like, like I wasn't sure what my vibe was even supposed to be. Like I had Mornwatch like dialogue options that were like, "Oh yeah, can't wait to go back to the necropolis. Like I missed it or whatever." And I'm like, but like, shouldn't I feel kind of weird about like going back after I've been kind of kicked out? Not necessarily kicked out, but like kind of like, please like fuck off for a while. And yeah, it just is very, very, very strange in a way. Like I had a hard time making Rook feel like a character rather than a player extension of myself, even though I did try to play Rook very much like a character rather than Pearl picks Pearl's choices. Um which was interesting to say the least. Yeah, and then yeah, I don't yeah.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the sentiments of how they handle it. It almost like flies in the face of just kind of like traditional story structures and how you handle a main protagonist. Because I think the big through line that Rookie really learns, which doesn't change really based on the faction or who you are or anything like that, is this relationship to leadership and what it takes. And with a little pinch of like how to handle regret and all that type of stuff. But that's not necessarily a Rook thing. That's just a reflection of the Dreadwolf arc and character. So I think I feel like largely Rook is a passenger in their own story, and which kind of sucks because they are anointed to be the leader of this group and they technically have to make some of the big decisions, but that doesn't really manifest in anything super impactful or meaningful in a way that I think really stands out. Like the Inquisitor having to dictate the Mage and Templar war is huge, and how
Yeah.
they pick between Hawk or the Grey Warden commander for the um, whole fade sequence, and then how they handle the Orlais level with all the politicking and who you're gonna pick and how you even pick them, and even with picking the new divine and all that type of stuff. Like, your Inquisitor was picked for that position because of the nature of the story and how they were fade touched, but they made super impactful choices that felt meaningful and relevant, and they
It's
spoke
not like
about
they earned
themselves.
the position. Like, does that make sense? Like they had this experience that put them in a place that was of power inherently, but even though they were kind of like under watch at the beginning, but by the time you're like dictating the Mage and Templar War and stuff, it feels like you've like maybe not that decision particularly, but by the time you're doing some of the other shit, it feels like you've earned your place to be doing that. You feel like a leader of the Inquisition, where I still was like, Varric picked me to be the leader of this group, or he decided that, I guess, but like, I didn't feel like I necessarily earned that place by any means.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is an anointment by just kind of by happen chance because you did something really cool in your background, and that's really why, which is like, okay, but that doesn't tell me why anyone else that Varric has come across in his travels couldn't do it. Why couldn't someone from Dragon Age 2 do this? Why couldn't someone from Inquisition technically do this? Why is Rook the one to take on the Solus and all that type of stuff? Like, it doesn't really connect, and you're just kind of supposed to ride with it because you love Varric and he's him and all that type of stuff, and it's somewhat frustrating in that sense. But more specifically with like the dialogue and the archetype of Rook, I think it is kind of disappointing that your Rook only has the one personality. I mean, they let out a couple of F-bombs during the story, but overall this is a kind of happy-go-lucky insecure leader that is pushing through the story. And I found Rook, even though their portrayal and acting was pretty solid, I found them to be largely lacking texture outside of, oh, I have Grey Warden dialogue, so let's do that, and that's really neat and that's cool. So cool that I have the Grey Warden dialogue, but I'm still the same person. Like, why can't I be a jaded Grey Warden, or a sad, depressed Grey Warden, or anything else? Like, you can't really make bad choices in this game or have bad dialogue in this game. What is a renegade run through of Dragon Age: The Veilguard? It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
So definitely can't exist, I don't think.
Yeah, so it's like you have this premise of a story that's supposed to be do all the good things because you're trying to save the world and the universe, but like, the way you do it has to always be savory and always has to be ethically clean and all that type of stuff. Whereas Shepard, he's always going to get the job done, and he's going to fight to stop the Reapers. But if you do a Renegade playthrough, you don't give a fuck about how it's done. If I have to work with the Elusive Man, I'll do it. If I have to slave this collector ship, I'll do it. If I have to, discard the Quarians to have the Geth with us, then I'll do it. He has such more meaningful choices for the purposes of getting the job done based on your choices and the type of Shepherd you want. And you can be good and bad on both, or you can be all good. And Shepard's personality is shaped by a lot of those decisions and the options to like have those real time, quick time cutscenes where you could hit the trigger for Renegade or the other trigger for Paragon in terms of engaging in the dialogue, which I think was a really good way to force the player to engage with what's being said and also reward that player for their engagement with a cool in the moment type interaction based on the choices that they have made so far. And I think despite this game insisting on wanting to be Mass Effect 2, I wish they had taken that. And I wish they would have taken like the flexibility of personality as well in this story, and they just kind of don't. And that, I think, is really unfortunate and a bummer. with who they are and who they're supposed to be within the story. I would have wanted a bit more from them. From them.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking a lot about like what makes like the Inquisitor specifically, actually the Inquisitor and Shepard. I was thinking about a lot because um Shepard is like, a character, and Hawk. Um Shepard and Hawk, I'll talk about them. Like are both characters where like they're giving you a character basically, like they're not creating like the character from the ground up. Um and how I felt still like more like I had a voice in developing that character than I necessarily felt for Rook. I did come to like Rook and like everything, but like by no means am I walking away being like Rook is one of my favorite characters I've played. Like no. Um, but like the Inquisitor specifically, so interesting because they're just so like and you don't even have that many dialogue options as the Inquisitor, like compared to the Warden. like like the Warden has just a lot more like different
They're
dialogue.
feasting.
Yeah, they're feasting, but still I felt like the Inquisitor was a character, like very much like somehow not just a player character but a character. And I just think that the I didn't realize how good the Inquisitor's overall writing was um until I played Rook. Even like just very impressive what you can manage to feel from the Inquisitor's character with the relatively limited scope of options you have, um, and
Yeah.
limited understanding of the Inquisitor's background.
I think
Um,
I think Baldur's Gate 3 demonstrated the power of a silent protagonist again with the number of dialogue options that you're presented with not having to have that voice acted. But I understand that in an action RPG, you want to be a little bit more connected with your protagonist, with what they're saying and how they're saying it and all that type of stuff. So I'm not going to begrudge them that they went with a voice protagonist because, again, they've been doing this for ever since 2, and they did it for all of the Mass Effect games. So I understand that this was what was coming, and so that choice in itself is not bad. But in tandem with all of your dialogue choices feel like a different slice of the same pie, it's like, damn. Now I'm really missing the silent protagonist and the other ways that I can inform how I'm saying something and shape my own character's personality based on my headcanon, whether I'm a Mornwatch, rogue, or if I'm a Grey Warden mage, or whatever the case may be. So in that sense, I think there were. I think the dialogue for Rook at almost every point in turn is a lost opportunity to have more informed personality, because you get a lot more personality from Inquisitor and Hawk as voice protagonists, even though one of them is created and one of them is technically pre-assigned in terms of their appearance and who they are. It's that I felt a lot more agency with how I shaped my Hawk to be, whether I am in favor of the Templars or the Mages, if I'm in favor of Anders or not. And while you do get the choices at the end of the companion quests, and you can shape those decisions at the end of the companion quest based off of your head canon, I can't really shape those choices based off of Rook's personality and how they talk. They, even when you pick the complete opposite choice of what you think your Rook should pick, how they say it and deliver it is like, oh, it just sounds the same, but it's a different choice. It feels the same, but it's a different choice.
yeah, yeah, that was a lot of yeah. I don't know, like something that shouldn't I don't feel like should bother me, but it kind of does. Is the fact that and it's something that I think like speaks to the lack of um importance of some of the choices you get to make in Veilguard. Um, is that like when you do the companion choices for at the end of their companion quests, you get the same trophy no matter which one you pick, and like that's not necessarily a problem, but I feel like having Harding decide to become like vengeance versus like compassion, like I feel like is a big difference. And depending on like Emmerich deciding to save Manfred versus becoming a lich is like a huge like difference for I feel like his character and everything. Um and the fact that like it has no real effect on your relationship with them or the outcome of the game, considering it gives you the same like trophy option, like the trophy option being the same regardless of the outcome, like makes me feel like it's just like another like way of symbolizing that like no like it wasn't a right or wrong, it wasn't a this has a like a significant impact on what happens in the story. It just like means you completed it. It's like a checklist rather than like um an actual uh an actual consequence in the character's life, which I did is a little like it's upsetting that I'm thinking like that, like distilling it to that, but like also I'm doing that because like it I'm looking for the deep parts of the game because that's what I expect to be doing in a BioWare game.
Yeah, yeah. When I was reflecting on the game and Rook in particular, I had played around with this idea of, you know, with their insistence of Rook being the good guy in the story, and that somewhat being the archetype that they want to represent and deliver on. I played around with the idea of like, what if this game just fully committed with the idea of like, we don't even need the dialogue wheel. We want to tell you the story of the Rook and
Mm.
how they take down Solus and the Evanuris, and we are taking a bold step into having you still make choices. You will still have to decide what is going to happen here or here at these points, but the actual dialogue of said Rook, it's going to be preset, and it's going to be this thing because we have this story for you that we want to tell, as opposed to having you try to mold this at every single point along the way, because what you're going to be molding is going to be ultimately the same. So why don't we just rip that part out for the sake of having you just make choices and we just talk along the way. And you
Mm.
would have to make those choices along the way based off of how your companion plots go and how you feel like your faction is. So like if I'm Mornwatch and I'm this character and I have this background, I think I would make these choices with the characters. But the dialogue will be the same and the dialogue will reflect your choices, but you're not choosing verb for verb or noun for noun what you're actually saying in those moments. We're just going to shape your dialogue path along the way based off of the choices that you're making. And I think that would have been a little bit more interesting because you focus on kind of one branch of writing. You're focusing
Yeah.
on, okay, let's make this one archetype as fleshed out and as deep as we want, and let's have the dialogue only reflect the factions and not for the branching paths of what you could potentially say. And two, you don't risk letting down some of your players by putting in options for your dialogue, but those options are kind of just a mirage or an illusion of choice because we ultimately know that we want to create this one archetype. And so I had played with that idea in my head. I don't know if Dragon Age fans would have responded to it, if once that was revealed prior to the game's release, of like, oh fuck, you're taking out dialogue options in your RPG, like what is this game? But playing this game and having experienced it in hindsight, I wonder if that would have been actually more of a boon to what the game actually is than an actual hindrance. And that's where I think once again we're at a clash of what this game what this game is, as opposed to what series this game belongs to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that is a really interesting thought. And yeah, I don't feel like I can say anything particularly insightful to it because I hadn't thought about it, but that's yeah, wow. Interesting.
Simmer on that.
I am simmering on it. I'm like, oh shit, that is very, very, very interesting. I yeah, no, there's so much. There's so much about this game.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know.
we're we're,
Yeah.
we're getting close to our time end, so I want to probably have you surmise your thoughts around the Rook character in brief, and maybe just put a little petite
Oh,
on
so
the
on it.
on what we've covered so far with regards to even factions or Rook or just Rook specifically, however you want to take it. But yeah, let's start to wind down.
Okay. Yeah, I think something that mm, like I think I might have mentioned this already. So if I'm retreading what I've already said, please tell me. But
Summaries, you're supposed to retread what you say.
yeah. But like if I've said this exactly, like verbatim, Um, like something about the Inquisitor, Hawk, the Warden, and I did say this. I did say this. I said this exactly. I'll say it again, whatever. It's just that like this game, going back to like its like summer reveal trailer with the companions, um, they played this song in the background and everyone didn't like it because of the vibe. And it was like, we can be heroes. And that was the song, you know?
You're talking about the reveal
Um,
trailer again?
yeah.
Okay,
With the
continue.
companion.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and the heroes of the Veilguard and whatever. And I didn't really feel like I got to be a hero, really, and because I didn't really feel like I was Rook, or that like Rook was like a super developed character for most of the game, and so like if that was the goal was to like make you the hero character, I don't know that it really did that. Like I saved the day, sure, but like I wasn't like I didn't have moments where I felt like I was like truly leading like the moment. Like I felt if anything it was more like the the Veilguard, Rook, all of us, the factions were almost far more in the background than anything. And that's fine if that was purposeful. Like I didn't feel like the people knew who we were, right? Like the people didn't know. This was like there were lots of groups of people who are not the people, if that makes sense. Like the people of Kirkwall, they know Hawk. Um, the people knew the hero of Ferelden. That's like a story. That's like lore now in Ferelden. Um, the people learned of the Inquisitor as the story went on. Um, Commander Shepard already had a little bit of a claim, like within the military, I guess. But like, I feel like there was a general knowledge of who Commander Shepard was.
Well,
By like,
he in
there
the
was you have commercials on the Citadel.
yeah, and just I mean, before even the end of Mass Effect 1, Shepard becomes renowned across the galaxy as the
Yeah.
first human Spectre. So he
Right.
has a
Yeah.
story before he even does anything really notable.
Right. Yeah. So like people know who you are. You like walk in the place, people are like, "Oh shit." And like I felt like by the end of those games that was pretty fucking earned. Like I was like, "Holy shit, like I feel like I am like a legendary character and that feels insane." Like and I'm not like searching out a game that like gives me that. And so like or even a story that like provides me with that kind of feeling, like even in D&D that's not really what I'm looking for, but like it was crazy to have like a few moments in those games like hit me would be like holy shit, like I feel like a fucking hero and that's incredible, like that's wild. And I didn't get that in this game, which isn't a problem for me. It's the problem is that like it felt like that's what it wanted, kind of. but I just never felt like it got there. And despite doing like the heroic deed, and so if the through line or plot line would have been a little more about like doing things for the sake of good in the background, like even though you might not be known, like if that was part of it, like that would have been a lot more chill and lit. Like I would have felt a lot more in line maybe with how Rook's story happened to play out, but
Yeah.
that was just the case. And maybe I'm known within the factions kind of, but like the faction strength thing again also like as you were saying is so weird and like environmental storytelling wise they do okay with it because they um do like fill up like either the Grey Warden camp or the Veilguard camp like as your strength grows like just more people inhabit those places but like I didn't feel like the veil jumpers were better at veil jumping by the fucking end of it like I just didn't and so there was like just a disconnect between some of the things of this game that the game wanted to do and what it achieves. And while there's like a lot of really good thoughts and things put on the table and things for me to munch on, um, I feel like there's still like a lot that was not not hit. It didn't hit the mark as well as I was hoping.
Yeah. And I'll just build on top of that with my summary and then we can wrap this up. But I think you brought in an interesting idea. I mean, I started the idea with the idea of Rook being a passenger in their own story, and I think you built onto that with by saying Rook at times doesn't feel like a hero. And I'll build onto that idea again by saying Rook actually feels like a team lead in the normal like retail fucking sense. Like Rook's job
No.
is to therapize and remove obstacles for the individual team members so they do their fucking job, as opposed to Rook actually like rallying and accomplishing the big thing through their own individual merits. And I see that throughout the whole plot and how it's structured. I think like the only truly notable thing that he does is the killing of Elgernon, which is pretty big because that is technically the final boss. But every single step along the way is only done by talking to your companions and removing obstacles for them so they can do their job. And the how that manifests out through the third act with like these team members doing this and this them doing that, it is suicide mission esque, and I do appreciate that. But even when it comes down to it, I was like, I didn't get a super strong impression of like their tale is going to live on throughout all of them. And I guess that is a testament to the name title, because this game is about the Veilguard. It is Lucanus who takes out Gillenane, and technically Lucanus slash Harding slash Davrin, who takes out Gillenane. It is technically Nev slash Balara and Rook who take out Elgernon. And then it is the Tosh or whoever who stays down below who takes down the giant fucking juggernaut and takes out the Venatori mage commander and all that type of stuff. So the Veilguard do things and they do accomplish things, but I think at a lot of the times it hinders Rook's ability to shine through their own merits and their own identity. I think where they truly start to... I think ignoring Elgernon, the most heroic thing that Rook does in this whole RPG experience is escaping the jail of regret, the prison of regret that Solus could not escape out of. And so while that is admirable and it is such a beautiful moment in the game, it is one of like two moments where you're like, oh shit, Rook is the hero of the story. This is why Rook was picked. And even then, that's like really going a long way to insist that the Inquisitor couldn't escape the jail of regret or anything like that, or some other character couldn't escape the jail of regret. But yeah, so team lead Rook here is
Oh, that sucks so much. You say team lead rook. Oh God, it feels so disrespectful.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's but I agree. It's just really funny.
Yeah, so it's very interesting in how this game puts rooks in these types of positions and how they have to approach them and solve for them, but yet it doesn't manifest in something more empowering or powerful than what we would like it to be. So yeah, that's really what I have to say. And this will wrap up our part 2 of our Dragon Age Veilguard discussion, covering all of the factions in the game and the protagonist of the game. And we'll have
Ooh,
another third review session where I'm sure we'll potentially talk about gameplay, or we'll talk about just lore implications throughout all of the Veilguard and its choices. So there's still plenty of discussion left to be had about this game. We're getting
crazy
there.
enough, there's still plenty of discussion to be had about this game.
Yeah, unfortunately, we spent an hour just on the Grey Wardens and the Mornwatch, and I think we spent about 45 minutes just talking about zip lines because that's how we operate. So
Those
I'll
are the
wrap.
important things.
Yeah, only the important content covered in this review series. But alas, I will wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Pro, for being a co host on this review non podcast series. And thank you again. And I will talk to you guys later.